President Carter changed his view on the Soviets as a result of that blatant invasion of Afghanistan.
He certainly lost a lot of his illusions about the Soviet Union, particularly after Afghanistan. Afghanistan hit him hard.
Jimmy Carter was so upset because he thought Brezhnev was someone that he could work with. And then Brezhnev thought that Carter wasn't paying attention, decided to invade Afghanistan, and boom, Carter said no.
The Soviets saw a side, ironically, of Carter that most Americans never did see, and that was the tough side. That was the hard side.
What is the option that we had? Not to resist and let the Soviets overwhelm the country completely?
He apparently had a very severe change of mind and immediately agreed to help the Afghan Mujahideen with lethal weapons. And I think the invasion took place on 26th or 27th December, and the first weapons that we sent through the Pakistanis arrived on the 10th of January, which was pretty quick.
And we in the Carter administration started that support through the CIA.
We, the CIA, formed up a very quiet, covert, clandestine alliance of countries to work against them. And we made it miserable for them over 10 years.
The objective was very clear in 1979 and 80 and through the 80s, and that was our objective, and the policy objective was to drive the Soviets out of Afghanistan.
How could we predict way back in 1979 that the people we were supplying arms to defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan were necessarily going to turn into something as horrible as the Taliban?
We created the Taliban, we created this fundamentalist army, and we did not know what we were doing. We did not take into account the cultural reality of what was on the ground there.
But Carter has another crisis on his hands, one that has stirred up public opinion. 1 month before the invasion of Afghanistan, the staff of the American embassy in Tehran was taken hostage by Islamic students. The hostage crisis and a failed military rescue operation could spell doom for Carter's political ambitions. He's running for re-election against a hard-hitting Ronald Reagan, whose campaign is handled by William Casey.
I believe that this administration's foreign policy helped create the entire situation that made their kidnap possible. And I think the fact that they've been there that long is a humiliation and a disgrace to this country.
Carter was completely consumed by events in Tehran.
President Carter calls in all his advisors. He then decides to open secret negotiations with the new Iranian government to win the release of the hostages before presidential election. But someone working inside the White House relays every move to Ronald Reagan's team.
We know that Carter was close to getting a deal with the Iranians to release the hostages before the elections. The Republicans got wind of this and realized that if Carter got the hostages out, he might win the election, and tried to make sure that this operation wouldn't succeed, because for some reason, suddenly, about 2 weeks before the elections, the Iranians just stopped negotiating. They just stopped.
How did that happen? Because that national security staff leaked classified information to the Reagan campaign to assist Reagan getting elected president. There was an entire intelligence operation to ruin Jimmy Carter's presidency.
Frank Carlucci, CIA Deputy Director, resigns and joins Ronald Reagan's team, soon followed by Robert Gates, head of the National Security Council.
Gates worked for Jimmy Carter. Carlucci worked for Jimmy Carter. All these guys worked for Jimmy Carter. And suddenly, it's just coincidental that every one of those guys in that operation that Carter ran ended up working for Ronald Reagan.
I wanted to get out of the Carter White House, and I wanted to go back and take a senior analytical position at CIA.
I had planned to leave government, so I did not abandon Jimmy Carter, and I don't think Bob Gates did either.
I had frankly gotten fed up with the Carter White House.
And so Reagan comes in, and they all move over to Reagan.
The American hostages are released on the very same day Jimmy Carter hands over power to successor Ronald Reagan, January 20th, 1981.
It was clear that the Republicans didn't have anything to do with it. It was the decision on the part of the Iranians to humiliate Carter by not freeing them until January 20th after he'd left office.
I don't think there was anything to it. I don't think there was no deal between the Republicans and the Khomeini forces. That's clear.
That's all one of those conspiracy theories that's just absolutely not true.
10 years later on television, Jimmy Carter described the behind-the-scene maneuvering during the October surprise operation.
President Bani Sadr, who was a leader of Iran then working under the Ayatollah Khomeini, has made public statements on several occasions to responsible news reporters that there was a deal made.
Casey was the central figure. He was traveling in Europe at that time. Casey's role remained a mystery for a very long time. He was the campaign manager for Reagan, and he went on to become the director of CIA.
Ronald Reagan decided to make William Casey the key player in his administration long before moving into the White House.
You remain the eyes and ears of the free world. You are the tripwire over which the totalitarian rule must stumble in their quest for global domination.
Casey was the one who orchestrated Reagan's resounding victory, deftly put Jimmy Carter out of the running. He managed Reagan's election campaign with finesse, sparing no effort and no funds to ensure victory. William Casey's business activities had made him a billionaire. He was also chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which oversees operations on the New York Stock Exchange. Ronald Reagan had limited knowledge of foreign affairs. He gave Casey a free hand to decide the country's new directions. During the transition period, CIA Director Stansfield Turner kept the future president abreast of world affairs.
I went to brief him as the prospective president. George Bush was not there, in my recollection. And I briefed him.
And he'd do the briefing, and the Soviets have this missile here and this missile here, and they're working on this silo shutdown. Very detailed, long briefing. And Reagan would get up and like loosen his tie and say, "Is it hot in here?" And go up and, "You want some coffee? Yeah, can I get you something?" Because he had no interest.
I thought some of his questions were not very deep.
After that, there were no more briefings. Reagan never got the briefings. His aides got the briefings. So we had no idea what the hell was going on.
With his nomination as CIA director, William Casey strengthens the agency's role and reinstates most of the jobs eliminated by Stansfield Turner. During his tenure, the agency steps up its covert operations.
Bill Casey was possibly the most powerful director of Central Intelligence since Allen Dulles.
He had a rather good relationship with the president, and he derived a lot of his authority from the fact that the president trusted him.
He could pick up the phone and say, "Ronnie," and talk to the president.
William Casey was unique in our recent history because he was a man who was co-equal in power with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States.
Casey wanted to be Secretary of State. Casey couldn't be Secretary of State. They wouldn't let him because he couldn't get through the clearances. So they picked Al Haig.
William Casey was a very dedicated believer in covert action. And in that sense, he didn't have the experience with covert action that I have had. And so I was very leery and suspicious.
He was completely unsatisfied with the CIA bureaucracy. And therefore, he kept trying to do things on the perimeter.
Casey was running the CIA as if he was running the mafia.
William Casey lays out his first objective: to reestablish order in Nicaragua, where the Marxist-Leninist Sandinistas took power after Carter hastened the fall of dictator Somoza.
Somoza was a CIA flunky who was a creep, a crook, terrible, on our payroll for years, like 100 other Latin American and African dictators. I mean, we used them. We needed them. That was the attitude. Hire the bad guys, pay them off, and they'll do what you need. It's for business. In this case, bananas, I guess.
So one evening, I don't know, like 7 o'clock night, I went up and saw Casey, as I frequently did. We sat there and we were looking out over the lights over the Potomac, and I said to him, "Look, I think I've got a solution, and what the government and what CIA should do." to do better.
The Sandinista policy was hatched by the Clandestine Services Division of the CIA. Casey expanded on it.
There was a coup against Allende, but in Nicaragua, we didn't really have any coups. We take the 500 people up on the Honduran-Nicaraguan border, create a guerrilla operation in Nicaragua to interdict their arms shipments to El Salvador and elsewhere, one. Second, by creating a revolutionary atmosphere.
Latin America always had stormy relations with the CIA. During the Reagan administration, the Casey-led CIA steps again to center stage, leading a decidedly bellicose campaign in Central America. Working through the Contras, the CIA steers the war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, while stepping up covert actions in El Salvador and Honduras.
I believe that covert action, okay, is simply an extension of foreign policy, short of war. People have been employing covert action since the beginning of time.
Bill Casey was the most controversial director of my time. In many ways, Bill Casey was the best director and the worst director we had, because he got our relationship with Congress in just terrible trouble.
1986 marked the beginning of the Iron Gate scandal. The U.S. sold arms to the Islamic Republic of Iran. The $30 million profit was used to continue financing anti-Sandinista guerrillas, despite a congressional ban on all efforts to destabilize the government of Nicaragua and give support to the Contras. All covered CIA operations are supposed to receive official approval from the President of the United States.
Did the President know about all of this? Of course he did. There wasn't anybody in Washington who didn't know that. In any cocktail party you went to, the fact that he was doing this was known to everybody.
And we had gone through Iran-Contra, and CIA was being killed.
William French Smith determined that under an appropriate finding, you could authorize the CIA to sell arms to countries outside of the provisions of the law. If the CIA, using an authorized agent as necessary, purchased arms from the Department of Defense under the Economy Act, and then transferred them to Iran directly after receiving appropriate payment from Iran. You recall that?
I do.
Was it illegal to sell arms to Iran, taking the profits and moving them over to the Contras?
Colonel North, when you talk to Director Casey about the fact of using...
I will tell you right now, Counsel, and all the members here gathered, that I misled the Congress.
At that meeting?
At that meeting.
Face to face?
Face to face.
You made false statements to them about your activities in support of the Contras?
I did.
There's always been a number of attacks against CIA, particularly for activities in Latin America, particularly Central America. I mean, that's where Bill Casey ran into his trouble in the Iran-Contra business, the whole business in Central America.
But William Casey gets a chance to apply his strategy for fighting communists in the USSR and Afghanistan, where war has been raging for 3 years. The CIA does its utmost to get the Soviets bogged down in a conflict that will last 10 years and finally drive them out of the region.
Bill Casey changed the rules in Afghanistan in 1985. Carter's decision was to harass the Soviets, to torment them, to make life difficult. In 1985, Bill Casey got President Reagan to sign a directive that says, you're there to win. You're to drive them out. And then Bill Casey came to me, and I had known him before from my Africa days. And he says, I want you to go to Afghanistan, and I want you to win.
The resistance was able, in the long run, to defeat the 120,000 troops. We had not expected that. How did they defeat them?
They were provided with huge amounts of military aid. That was very important. The Stingers, for instance, they really made Soviet aircraft actions practically very vulnerable. We lost so many helicopters, and we were afraid to fly low-flying planes at the time. You know, that was the CIA ammunition.
Without the Stingers against the helicopters, the Soviets would have won.
The CIA was already supplying Afghanistan's Mujahideen with arms and money under Carter. But under William Casey, the agency overarms dozens of guerrilla groups over which it has no control, even supplying them with high-tech weapons so they can attack the Soviets. Anti-aircraft missiles are put in the hands of Islamist fanatics in return for a vague promise they will only be used against Russia. 10 years after the Soviets left, the weapons are still in circulation.
$1 billion a year at the end, a total of maybe $3 billion for the Afghan effort. You know how much the Cold War cost the American taxpayer? $13 trillion. There's not even I don't even know how many zeros that is. And $3 billion to finish it off was a good buy. It's a bargain.
That was a success. The fact that you created a group of people who were armed led to other problems.
In fact, the United States CIA supplied the Afghan Mujahideen with weapons, with instructions, and as we know, bin Laden was one of the recipients at the time.
The most fundamentalist groups at that time are the ones that we now face, or their descendants, if you will, are the ones that we face.
We did provide some arms to the Afghan Mujahideen, and some of those turned around and are now fighting against us. That's true.
This is an example of blowback, of unintended consequences. The agency took actions to help bleed the Soviet Union, and it helped bring down the Soviet Union. But they did not understand that the people they were helping were not fighting just the Soviet Union.
We shouldn't have had so many illusions about who our friends were in that campaign against the Soviets in Afghanistan.
We didn't choose our allies very well. We didn't exercise very much control over them. And then after we had accomplished the purpose of bleeding the Soviet Union, we did not continue to be engaged with those people. We closed down the shop.
The world then, after 1989, turned its back on Afghanistan. Not CIA. CIA doesn't build nations. CIA does its thing.
We thought we thought the American government should continue to provide support to the Afghans after '89, and essentially the United States walked away from Afghanistan.
And let Afghanistan become something new, a failed state. And that's not a good thing.
Maybe they didn't need quite so many arms, Stinger missiles. Maybe they didn't need that much support. And did we create the Islamist movement?
It was a foolhardy and stupid policy that almost destroyed Afghanistan, and the blowback, the effect of all of that is being felt now around the world with this war on terrorism. I mean, we have to look at our own complicity in creating the conditions that allowed a lunatic like Osama bin Laden to succeed in appealing to people who have no hope.
The Soviets are dragged into the mad race to overarm the country. 10 years of bitter fighting bleed Russia dry. Throughout the Reagan presidency, the CIA's Robert Gates issues highly exaggerated assessments of Soviet power, rendering the White House totally unable to predict the fall of the Soviet Union.